Good afternoon. Welcome again to the Duncan Showroom and our show, Something Lighter for the Dark. My name is Lee Porteous. On behalf of the Storytellers on Vancouver Island, I want to express our gratitude to Longevity John for the opportunity to tell stories here in this wonderful theater that he has created, and to Ted Cadillac for making us heard and seen so well. Whenever and however you come to see us, we encourage you to make a donation to help keep the showroom open and stories happening here. Normally, Longevity John would be doing the first introduction, but he's not here. He's in Vancouver at a fashion show where his granddaughter is modeling, but also modeling the things that she herself has created, and it's her father, his son's birthday. So he has abandoned us for family, we could say. This event is one of a series of storytelling events each month. Tellers will be storytellers from the 3 adult storytelling groups on the island, the Victoria Storytellers Guild, the Around Town Tellers from Nanaimo, and the Mid-Island Storytellers from Parksville, Qualicum Beach. We acknowledge with respect the Cowichan First Nation, the largest single First Nation in BC, on whose traditional territory this event is taking place, and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Welcome to all of you who are or will be joining us online, and those who are here today. We have our faithful audience members. We're happy to see them every month. For those of you here with us, please mute your phones. You will have a chance to check them during our mid-show break and also chat with the tellers, Ted and Longevity John, and, well, not Longevity John, as part of my script, and each other. So we'll begin the first half. There'll be 2 halves and a break about 10 minutes between the 2 of them. Our first teller today is Jennifer Ferris from the Victoria Storytellers Guild. She is a very experienced storyteller for at least 30 years now, and she has told every kind of story that you can imagine, including improv storytelling. That's only for the brave, I think. And this year she got granted the Story Keepers Award by the Storytellers of Canada, Contre du Canada, the highest award any storyteller that's a member of that organization can get. So we have her here tonight, this afternoon. And she's going to deliver a story that I asked for called Hot Dog Day.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Lee Porteous for organizing these events and bringing us here to share our stories. Yes, I'm going to tell you about Hot Dog Day, and I'm sure that everybody in this room has volunteered in some way during their life. Well, when my family and I arrived in Victoria in 1987, I had 3 little boys. My oldest, Hal, was ready to go into grade 2 at Quadra Elementary, and he was followed quite quickly into the school by his younger brother, Stephen. So that left the youngest, 3-year-old Adrian, still at home with me. And I thought that it was about time that I made a contribution to the school community. Perhaps there was some small volunteer job that I could take on, and then I might, even make some friends. So I decided I would go to the first PAC, the Parent Advisory Council meeting of the new school year. Well, the minute I said that I could possibly volunteer in some way, well, picture a group of hyenas encircling a baby wildebeest. They pounced on me. You're just the sort of person that we need. Our previous Hot Dog Day coordinator, Heather, wonderful mother, incredible volunteer, such a staunch supporter of the school community. She was our coordinator, but she's moved on to middle school with her child, and we are in need of a coordinator, and we think that you would be wonderful for the job. Well, I wanted to be a superb mother and a wonderful volunteer and a staunch supporter of the community, so I said yes. Well, wonderful Heather said she would meet with me and she would explain the job and she would give me any paperwork that was needed to start the first Hot Dog Day of the new school year. Wonderful Heather said that hot dog day was easy peasy, lemon squeezy. It almost ran itself. She said that I had to send out a notice to the school community to see who wanted to participate, that I would have to make an order of milk, chocolate and white, donuts, chocolate and plain, and hot dog buns. I didn't need to order wieners because in an incredible gesture of forethought and planning, wonderful Heather had ordered an extra box in the spring, and those hot dogs were languishing in her freezer as we spoke. And she said, the icing on the cake is that you have a wonderful group of volunteers who will help you. Wonderful people. So I got a copy of the little message to students and staff, and I delivered them to the school, and they were distributed among the classes. And I went back 3 days later, and yes, I had invited 380 people for lunch. I did a little kind of a cross-section of all the orders for each class, so I knew how many buns I needed to order, how many donuts I needed to order, how much milk I needed to order. And then I met with the volunteers, and they said that it was their job to arrive on the morning of hot dog day, and they would assemble a tub for each classroom, that they would check and fill the mustard and ketchup containers. Had I ordered extra mustard and ketchup? No, but I would. And they would count out the napkins for each class. Had I checked that we have enough napkins? No, but I will check. They would receive the order of buns, donuts, and milk. That sounds wonderful, I said. And what about the wieners? Where do we heat the wieners? Oh, they said, Heather, oh, what a wonderful volunteer she was. She liked to heat the wieners at her house and then bring them to the school. Oh, I see, I replied. So I made the requisite orders. I spoke with Heather. She said she was going to bring that box of wieners that she had in her freezer, deliver them to my back door, and I was to bring them into the house, and they would defrost overnight and ready for heating in the morning. What Heather didn't know was that in those days we had almost no money, so we certainly turned off the heating at night. So during the night, the temperature inside our house was not so different to the temperature outside the house. So when Adrian, my 3-year-old, and I walked into the kitchen on hot dog day morning at 7 o'clock, we opened up the box of wieners and saw that they were all still frozen together in an icy embrace. It's all right, Adrian, I have a plan. I got our little stepladder, I picked up the box of wieners, and I climbed to the top of the stepladder, and I dropped the box. I had to do that about 4 or 5 times, but in the end, all the wieners were rudely shaken apart. Now, wonderful Heather had said that she had actually opened the box and may have taken out a few wieners, so we had to count the wieners. So I said to Adrian, we'll count them in groups of 10. Adrian was really good at math. So we had little piles of 10 wieners around the kitchen, down the hallway, into the living room, into my bedroom. But in the end, we found out that we had 390 wieners, and I had bought some extras because, well, I wasn't sure. There might be a mistake. There might be extra orders at the last moment. And we also needed some vegetarian wieners. So now we were ready. We gathered all our wieners together, and then we began to heat them. Now, in those days, my kitchen was a simple affair. We had the big pot, we had the little pot, and we had a medium-sized frying pan. I could get 12 wieners in the big pot, 6 in the little pot, and 8 in the frying pan. So we had quite a big morning ahead of us because we had 415 wieners to heat. We put in the first batch. The water came to a boil, the wieners warmed. Then, of course, we had to take them out and put them in a warm place. So I put some pans in my oven, 200 degrees, and we transferred the warm wieners from the pots into the oven. It was a messy affair, and soon I had greasy wiener water all over my stove, my counter, the floor of my kitchen. We worked hard until 11 o'clock But at last every weaner was warmed, and we transferred them into a laundry basket lined with fresh towels and plastic bags, put them in our van, off we went to school. We got there just in time, I have to say. I could see that my volunteers had, laid out all the bins, one for each classroom, and there were the mustard and ketchup and the tidy piles of donuts and little towers of milk, chocolate and white and napkins. So then we began the wiener, or we should say, the hot dog dance. Wiener in the bun and wrap in a napkin, wiener in the bun and wrap in a napkin. It went on and on and on until every single wiener was in a container. It was 12 o'clock, lunchtime, the containers were taken up to the classrooms, and then 15 minutes later they all came back. And that was when my volunteers said, "We all have an appointment." And anyway, Heather always liked to do the clean-up herself to make sure that it was done right, and they disappeared. It is astonishing how much mustard and ketchup can be spilled in the bottom of a container in 15 minutes. Adrian and I scraped, we washed, we set up the containers, towers of containers for them to air dry. And when everything was done and put away, we got into our van and we drove home. And we walked around to the back of the house to the door into the kitchen. And that was... Well, before we left the house with our batch of wieners, I had noticed that the air in my house was thick with the stink of wiener, and that the floor of my kitchen was slick with the fat of wiener. But when we came back, exhausted from our distribution and clean-up of Hot Dog Day, I completely forgot about the floor. We walked into the kitchen, and I did one of those falls, a classic fall where your feet go up and your head goes back, and for a moment you enjoy the exquisite pleasure of levitation, and then bang, down on the ground. When the stars had cleared, I opened up my eyes. There was my 3-year-old with a worried expression on his face, leaning over, looking into my eyes. I'm all right. Adrian, we got up, we went in to my bedroom, and we lay down for the rest of the afternoon. And the following day, Adrian and I sat down and we developed a plan. The plan started with me going to the next PAC meeting, the Parent Auxiliary Advisory Committee meeting, and I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if the parent group bought a stove that we could have at the school, and then we could heat the wieners at school? Well, they thought this was a great idea. One of the parents even said that she and her husband owned a second-hand appliance store and that she would donate a stove. Everybody applauded. 3 days before HDD, Hot Dog Day, the stove was delivered to the school, and ever the optimist, I assumed that it worked. Oh, but in the meantime, I had to send out the order forms, get them back, do my little tabulated chart of how many hot dog buns, how many donuts, how many milks to be ordered, and I had to order wieners as well, but this time I knew that they would arrive unfrozen, right to the school, not to my house. So we arrived on Hot Dog Day, and it was about 10:30 in the morning, and my trusted volunteers were waiting for me. They'd already started to filter through the coffee, and I had bought 2 big pots to heat the wieners, and so we filled them with water and put them on this new stove, and we had a ceremonial turning on of the knobs, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. Half an hour later, that water was only, lukewarm at best. What are we going to do? Said the volunteers, all looking at me. Well, I said, we could divide up the wieners and we could all go home and heat some wieners at home. Who would like to volunteer? One chubby little arm shot up. Thank you, Adrian. My volunteers helped me to carry the box of wieners out to the car. They even let me take those big pots. As we drove back to my house, Adrian and I devised a plan. Adrian, when we get into the driveway, Mummy's going to jump out of the van, run into the house, and fill up the 2 pots in the frying pan with water, and we're going to heat the water, and I'll boil the kettle. Meanwhile, Adrian, I'm going to ask you to bring the wieners in from the van. It's a very big job, but I think you're up to it. I knew, having looked in the box, that these wieners were packaged in plastic bags, probably 24 wieners to a bag. So just bring 1 bag in at a time, Adrian, and then we'll get all the wieners heated and take them back to the school. We screeched into the driveway. I jumped up. I opened up the side door of the van and opened up the box for Adrian. I ran into the kitchen. I took the big pot, the little pot, the frying pan, the kettle, and I filled them all up and began to heat the water. And then I waited. And I waited. Where is Adrian? I went out of the kitchen around the house, and there on the driveway was a tragedy. There was my 3-year-old standing beside the van with an empty plastic bag in either hand and 48 wieners on the driveway. And he had this magic thing that he could do where he could produce a large tear which would teeter on his lower lid and stay there for hours, wobbling. But today he blinked and that tear ran down his little rosy cheek. It's all right, Adrian, I said. We'll pick them up, we'll wash them, and then nobody will know. So I bent down, I was picking up these wieners, had an armful of wieners. And I looked down the driveway and saw 2 men walking towards me. They were dressed identically, black suits, white shirt, black ties, shiny black shoes with thick rubber soles. And I could tell by the look in their eye and the pamphlets that they were holding in their hands that they had come to talk about the Lord. Now, I don't mind talking about the Lord, but this was hot dog day. I did not have time, but I had to be polite because of the 3-year-old. So, with my arms filled with wieners, I looked around for divine inspiration, and my eyes fell upon a pile of tulip bulbs there on the grass beside the flower bed, waiting to be put into the ground. I looked at the tulip bulbs, and I looked at the wieners, and I looked at the men, and I said, I'd love to talk, but I have to get these wieners in the ground before the first frost. Those men disappeared so quickly, it was as if they evaporated. Adrian and I turned, we took the wieners into the house, and then there was a back and forth, and wieners were warmed and put in the laundry basket with yet more clean towels and plastic bags, and we roared back to the school, and then, well, it was the hot dog dance. Wiener in the bun and wrap in a napkin, wiener in the bun and wrap in a napkin. Just in time, we filled those orders for each classroom. The containers went up to the classroom, and 15 minutes later they returned, and no surprise, my volunteers all had to go to the dentist. Adrian and I cleaned up, went home, got into bed, and slept until my husband came home that evening. The next day we sat down and we devised a plan. We brought up the idea of the very first quadra-elementary pizza day. I sent out the forms. I got them back. I made my little tabulated survey thing of pizzas, pepperoni and cheese, just cheese, pineapple and ham, milks, donuts. And I phoned the pizza company. 24 pizzas, please, to be delivered to the school. Goodbye and thank you.
So that's how Pizza Day happened. Just in case we all needed to know. I actually don't remember hot dog days, but then I'm pretty old. Thank God. Anyway, so it's my turn to tell you a story. And this story is called The Prawn Who Caused All the Trouble. A long time ago, there was a man who stood on the banks of the Irrawaddy River in the Bay of Bengal. And he was there sharpening his weapons. And as he was sharpening around, there was a prawn also nearby. And the prawn was getting more and more annoyed at all the stomping around this man was doing near him. And so he decided he'd bite him, and he bit him in the leg and then disappeared. Well, the man, of course, didn't know what had happened, but the prawn was very proud of himself. He thought, there, serves him right, stomping around like that. Well, the man didn't know what had bit him. He didn't see something that small. He was quite a tall fellow. And so he lashed out with one of his weapons to a tree that was nearby and cut into its bark. Well, the tree was indignant. What did I do? What did I do to deserve this? And so he decided he would take some revenge on the man, and he would drop a piece of fruit on the man's head. It was a big piece, big as a melon, but he missed the man. And what he did is he hit a rooster who happened to be ambling by. Well, the rooster was really angry about this, but he didn't want to take on a big tree. So what he did instead is he looked around, and there were some ants working away. And he went over to them and he said, well, I hear that you just love your work, and it makes you really happy to work. So he scratched away at what they were doing and said, there, now you've got more work, you should be happy. Well, the ants were quite indignant about this. They said, people always think that we just love to do this work. Well, we have work to do. And they were quite annoyed at the rooster's attitude as well. So they decided to get revenge, but they didn't go after the rooster. They went after a snake who was passing by, and they stung the snake. And the snake said, why me? Why me? It's my life. Always in the wrong place at the wrong time. So he looked around, and there happened to be a boar going by. So he bit the boar. The boar said, what was that for? What did I do? He said, well, it's the same problem as I have, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, nobody really wants to mess with a snake. So the boar instead went charging off to this plantain tree. And he bashed the plantain tree, and he ripped it up, and it fell over. And there was a bat who has his nest in the branches of the plantain tree. And he was thrown out of his nest, and he was very confused by this. Like, what's wrong with you, you stupid tree? I can't stay upright. And he was blundering about, and he bumped into an elephant, and he ended up in the elephant's ear. And he was so annoyed, he bit the elephant inside his ear. Well, the elephant, of course, went a bit crazy. He was lashing out and trying to shake his head and such, and he kicked a mortar, a big mortar, which was used for pounding rice. The mortar started to roll, and it rolled and it rolled and it rolled downhill, and wham! It flattened a hut that was in its way. This hut was owned by quite a fierce old woman, and she came out. She was really angry. She said to the mortar, now you are going to have to pay to have my house rebuilt. And the mortar said, never, never. If you want to find who's responsible, it's the elephant up there. He kicked me, and that's how I came down here. Besides which, your house shouldn't have been in the way anyway. I should be suing you for my bruises and such having to hit your house. Well, by this time, the old woman was marching quite quickly up the hill and accosted the elephant. You need to pay to rebuild my house. Me? You should be looking at that bat. The bat bit me, which is why I kicked out. The bat's responsible. The bat said, not me, madam. I was the one who was wronged, and it was that plantain tree that threw me out. And that's why the elephant kicked the mortar and your house was flattened. So she turned to the plantain tree. Now the plantain tree was lying there, and he was not feeling very well, and he was feeling quite sorry for himself. He said, oh, me, here I am, my roots, they're shriveling up in the air, and I have a headache. And the old woman said, well, you need to pay for my house being rebuilt. It wasn't me. I didn't do anything. It was that boar that dug me up and pushed me over. And she said, oh, well, I am not impressed with people who whine and are sorry for themselves. Stand up for yourself. And she marched off towards the boar, and the plantain tree said, won't anybody come and comfort me and help me? Meanwhile, she approaches the boar and said, you owe me the money to rebuild my house. And the boar said, not me, not me. I was bitten by that snake. And that snake is the reason that this happened. Go talk to the snake. Well, she got a forked branch, and she trapped the snake in that forked branch and said, you owe me the price of rebuilding my house. You're the cause of it being flattened. And the snake said, oh, well, it wasn't me. I wasn't the one who started this. No, I bit the boar because of those ants. Those ants stung me. They're the ones you should be talking to. Well, I don't think snakes are all that trustworthy. So you're going to stay where you are until I confirm this with the ants. So off she went. She spoke to the ants. The ants said, well, we didn't start all of this. We bit the snake because that rooster tore up our nest and caused us all this extra work. That rooster is the reason this happened to you. Go talk to the rooster. Well, she did. She went to the rooster, and the rooster said, well, madam, it's because of that tree. That tree dropped a piece of fruit on me. I had done nothing to anybody at that point. It's the tree that's responsible. So she went to the tree, and he said, madam, I was standing here. I had harmed no one. I had done nothing to anyone. But that man there, he slashed me with his weapon. I had done nothing to him. He's the reason for your troubles. Well, she looked at the man, and she became quite happy. He could obviously rebuild her hut, and it turned out he was her son. So she knew he would be happy to do that. So she went and spoke to him, and he said, well, now, I'm happy to rebuild your house, mother, but I have one little thing to deal with first, and it's that prawn that bit me. And the prawn is what started all of this. So they looked at the prawn, and the prawn looked around. Well, there really wasn't anybody else he could blame. He was the one who started all the trouble. So all of the creatures gathered around, and they looked at this prawn, and they said, well, Mr. Prawn, you're the cause of all this trouble, and for that you deserve to die. Now, how would you prefer? Would you like to die in cold water or hot water? Cold, said the prawn, and dove into a pond right to the bottom. And he sat at the bottom of the pond and thought, ha, I'm free of them now. I'm good to go. But the creatures asked the elephant to step up, and the elephant drained that pond. And so the man grabbed the prawn and gave the prawn to a toad who happened to be nearby. Now the toad, this is the first time we've heard about the toad, but he was there, just not part of this chain of trouble. And they gave the prawn to the toad and said, now make up a soup for us, and we will all have soup from this prawn. And so he threw it in his pot of water, and after some time he called everybody to come and have some of the soup. Well, they came and they tried the soup, and they looked at each other. It's just water. There's nothing in this. And they looked at the toad, and he said, well, I just had to try the prawn to see if it was done, and I swallowed it. It was an accident. It was an accident. Well, they were all annoyed at him, so they pinched the toad. And those marks that they put in that toad's back are there to this day, and that's why they're there. Now, the man went and he replanted the plantain tree, and he fixed his mother's house, and all of them got together and they mused about what had happened that day, and they decided it was really, other than the poor soup, quite an interesting day. Now, nobody knows what the prawn thought about that, because nobody asked his opinion. You know, you might wonder sometimes why you hear the stories you do. And just by whatever entertains me, eventually will come to you, no matter what its quality might be or what it's about. So our next teller is Catherine Sheehan, and you've heard her before if you've been to these events. And she is now a member of the Victoria Storytellers Guild, but she started out her storytelling career in Ottawa, and so, but she's moved a number of times. And so when she came here, she found her way to us. She has told, we've told together, Catherine and I, a number of places. We used to come up to Talal here and tell as well. So we've been on various storytelling adventures, and this is just one more of them. So I'll leave Catherine to introduce this story to you. It is what we would call, it's based on a literary story, which I think, although Catherine would not agree with me, I'm sure, that she has a special touch with literary stories.
Hello. Thank you, Lee. Nice to be back here again. Welcome to all of you. And I think you also know by now that I am originally from St. John's, Newfoundland, so that accounts for the accent. So welcome here today, and to any of those who might be joining us in Zoomland as well. Yes, this is, I guess, a literary story. Let me tell you about it before I start. In around 1885, an American writer and humorist called Frank Stockton wrote and published a story called The Lady or the Tiger. Some of you may have heard of it. It retained its popularity for a very long time. Now I think it might be hiding in various places of Storytellers' world to be revived and told again. But anyway, so I am here to tell you the story of Frank Stockton's The Lady or the Tiger. There's a choice, remember that. In the long, long ago time, there lived a certain semi-barbaric king whose ideas, although somewhat polished by some of his more progressive neighbors, still remained intense, florid, and unflappable. He was a man of extravagant fancy, was this king, and he communed with himself quite a lot, so that when he and himself had decided that something should be done, the thing was immediately done. Now, one of the things which contributed to the semi-barbarity of our king was he had devised a particular system of dispensing justice to his kingdom. And he thought it was not only a novel idea, but an eminently just one. And he's rushed to put it into practice for his kingdom. What he did was he built a huge amphitheater in which he would have exhibitions of manly and beastly skills of various kinds in order to instruct his people in the right way that things should be. For when his domestic and other situations went well, our king was a very genial fellow, really. But when there was a little hitch to be found, well, he was even more genial still, for our king liked nothing so much but to fix things and make things go straight and crush down things that might be crooked. So the great amphitheater was built, and events were planned to fill it, in which the entire population would come, and the king would be there with his court. This is how it was done, especially as an administration of justice. When somebody in one of the king's subjects was accused of a crime which attracted the interest and activity of the king to know about, he was immediately arrested. A day was set when this individual would be by trial in the amphitheater, and the trial was in this way. The king, with his court, sat above. There was a door below in which the accused entered the amphitheater. And then, just across from where the accused stood, there were two doors, both exactly alike and side by side, and kept from any noise being heard from whatever might be within. And this was the plan of justice. The accused was his right and his privilege and his order, it shall be said, that he would cross to space and open one of those two doors. It was completely up to him which one he opened. There was no guidance, there was no instruction, except the only instruction was that, because of the accusation against him, he must open one of the two doors. Now, if he was to open one door, and sometimes the result might come from one door, sometimes from the other, as I say, there was no guidance and no clue as to what he must do except to open them. If he opened one door, there came out of it a ravening, ferocious tiger, left to semi-starve, and it would immediately leap upon him, tear him to pieces, and devour him in front of the entire audience, who, witnessing this terrible, terrible event, would be left with sad, sad spirits and hanging heads, and would make their way slowly homeward, grieving that someone so young and so fair, or even so old and respected, should have merited such a fate. Amazingly, this was, his people thought, the king's people thought, a good way of dispensing justice. After all, the accused had the outcome in his own hands as to whether he was guilty or not. So if it was the tiger which came forth from the door, he would be devoured as a punishment for his guilt. If, on the other hand, the accused picked the other door, there came out of it a beautiful lady, one of the fairest in the king's entire court. And to this lady, the accused, as reward for his obvious innocence, would be immediately married. It mattered not that he might be already married, have a wife and family, or his affections might be involved elsewhere. The king now allowed no such details to interrupt his method of justice. And so a priest would appear, and choristers, and dancing maidens, and loud were the cheers of the people, as the innocent person was married to the beautiful lady of his choice, and was to lead her home, and the people were very joyful and delighted, and congratulated him on his leading his beautiful bride home. A very simple way of administering justice. And also the element of uncertainty in it, for the whole thing was based on chance, really, was in many ways quite entertaining to the people who approved of this method. I don't know why myself, but it seemed to be working well for him, for the king. Now this king had a daughter, as lovely as she was also as fierce in spirit as her father. She was the apple of his eye. He loved her above all else. Now, in the court of the king, there was also this young man, one of these youths you hear about in romantic stories that are of good breeding but very low station, and whose fate it seems to be to fall in love with princesses, as most romantic heroes are wont to do. And this young man and the princess, in return, had set their sights upon each other and fell deeply in love. He was handsome, he was kind, he had no social station, but did that matter really? And there was just enough of the semi-barbarity in their natures to make their love warm. So this affair went on for quite some time, until the inevitable happened. The king found out about it. Well, he did not waver in his duty for a moment. Immediately, the young man was arrested. Immediately, the day was set for his trial in the king's amphitheater, in front of all the people that could be gathered, in front of the court and the king. And the tiger cages of the kingdom were searched for the most ferocious beast imaginable. And so there were also the ranks of the most beautiful ladies of the king's court were also searched, should the verdict be the other way. And the man proved innocent. And proved how? Because of chance, because he would be forced to make the choice between the two doors. And so this was done. And the crowns gathered. And when the king and his court were all settled, the king looked around, pressed for the door to be open beneath, and the accused young man walked out into the arena. The population gasped. They had never seen a young man so fair, so handsome, They had not known he lived among them. And a sadness kind of drifted through the people, a kind of pity almost, that such a fair young man should suffer such a fate, such a choice. Now, the young man came out of the door, crossed to see where the king sat, and began to make his obeisance, as was the custom. But his mind was not really on the king. You know who he was looking for in that crowd. It was the princess. He wasn't sure that she would be there, but her nature did not permit her to absent herself from such a thing. For many days she had thought, and disturbed in her sleep, thought of the choice before her, before him, before her love. The young man was gazing only on her, and in his gaze at her white face, and as his eye met hers, he seemed to be asking, which is it? The princess was ready. She had been thinking for many days and sleepless nights what she should do. Not only because of her nature, but because she had more power than anybody else in that kingdom could have had beside her father the king. She knew which was behind each door. She knew behind which was the tiger. She knew behind which was the lady. And she had had enough gold to avail herself of this knowledge. And when the young man looked at her as he walked across the arena, he knew that she knew. And it was that made him fix her with his eye. Now, not only did the princess know behind which door was the tiger and which door was the lady, she knew who the lady was. It was another of the ladies of the court. She knew her. She had seen her. She had talked to her. And beautiful she was. But she also had seen her beloved and the lady looked at each other from time to time. And sometimes she'd seen them talking together, which could have been nothing at all. It could have just been a commonplace remark. But still, they had looked at each other, and with all her intense nature, the princess hated the woman who waited, blushing and trembling, behind the door. But she had made her decision. Through all these sleepless nights, she had made the decision. Her arm rested on a cushion in front of her, and as all eyes in the amphitheater were on him, not on her, very quickly she made just the tiniest motion to the right. No one saw but her lover, and without hesitating, he immediately strode across to the doors, opened the one on the right. Now, the point of this story is, which came out of the open door? Was it the tiger? Was it the lady? As I say, the princess, who gave a tiny but clear signal, had thought about it so much. She knew one way or another she was losing her love. And she shuddered at night when she woke up, when thinking of the ferocious tiger. How could she even think about that? But she also thought about the other choice, would lose him to a beautiful lady, and she would never have him. So who should have him, the lady or the tiger? It is a difficult question. Such a difficult question. Think of it yourself. If it was not you to make the decision, but this half-savage, jealous princess, would it not be better, you might think, for him to die and then go and wait for her in futurity? But then there was the other option, the dreadful tiger, the shrieks, the blood. She could not bear. It is a very, very difficult decision. And it is not for me. It is not for me to set myself up as the one who should answer it. And so, my dear listeners, I leave the problem to you. Which came out of the door? The lady or the tiger?
Now, I don't know, but Catherine might be open to bribes to tell you one way or another. But actually, after the break, she's going to give you the second chapter after this, the second episode. So we are at the break time now, and I have a few announcements. This is sort of customary in the storytelling world. November 8th, that's a Friday, at 7:30, the Roundtown Tellers have their monthly meeting, and the theme there is Call It Courage. That you can find out more by just going to the Roundtown Tellers, or you can ask me about how to get there. And they also have it on Zoom, so you don't actually have to be present in Nanaimo to see it. Then November 18th, which is a Monday, at 7:30, is the Victoria Storytellers Guild, their monthly meeting, our monthly meeting, and that you can see in person or on Zoom. And then November 24th, Sunday at 2 p.m., the Duncan Showroom is our next storytelling event, and the theme there is It Worked, or Almost Did. And so December 22nd, we have booked, I haven't totally got it confirmed, that Marva Blackmore and I will do another Ghost Stories one. The title of that will be, Can You Hear Them? The Whispers in the Dark. So now you have 10 minutes, and smoke them if you got them, and be back in 10.
I try to hide what's true. The world keeps telling me how I should be, but nature always slips through. Old habits die hard. Old habits die hard. Old habits die hard. Old habits die hard. I've been feeling so lost, so many voices in my head. The world keeps telling me how I should be, but I keep being me instead. Habits die hard, yeah. Hey, habits die hard. Old habits die hard, yeah. Old habits die hard. Let's jam a bit. Everything we wear, the world keeps telling me how I should be, but I'm can't help myself from being who I am.
This is very
Cool. That was
but you're going to have a very interesting ending, that's for sure. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be either. Probably.
You're not alone, no. You're not alone, no. You're not alone, no. Quiet one, you may not feel it now. Drenched yourself in doubt. Your time will come. Quietly, take another step. Keep your eyes ahead. Your time will come. You're not alone, no. You're not alone, no. You're not alone, no. You're not alone, no. You're not alone, no.
Let me know when it's ready to go. Now? Well, welcome back. This is the second half of our show tonight at the Duncan Showroom. This afternoon, I guess I should say. It's dark in here, so it feels like night. Something lighter for the dark. Marv and I had decided that given that there's all of these dark, creepy things this time of the year, we would go contrary to the trend. But even we will be dipping our toes in the other world, the second half. But first, we'll call Catherine Sheehan back, as I promised, and she has chapter 2 of these events.
I feel bad. I've done a terrible thing. I've done a terrible thing for a storyteller to impose such a burden on the audience. I'm really feel quite bad about that. You can imagine my joy when years ago, after I first discovered The Lady or the Tiger, not long after that, I found Frank Stockton, the author, wrote a sequel. My joy. I must find it, I thought. I must learn it, I thought. I must tell it, I thought. So I did, sort of. And I will present it with you today. Now, the sequel has a bit of a... it's not exactly chapter 2. It was published as a sequel to The Lady or the Tiger. And it has a rather tricky title. Remember this. It's called The Discourager of Hesitancy. Got that? The Discourager of Hesitancy. And so I will take you back in those long ago times once more to the court of that semi-barbaric king. And not long after the events which we quite lately have heard about, the story of The Lady or the Tiger and the impossible demands I put on my audience for it. Well, I didn't do it. Frank Stockton did, so blame him. What happened was this. A deputation of about 5 men from a distant city arrived at the palace of the king and asked if they could have an audience with one of the king's high officials. And they were greeted and brought in, and the official came to see them and asked them what their purpose was. Well, the leader of the 5 said, "Well, Honourable Sir, one of our neighbours in the country we come from, in the city we come from, was present that day, not so very, very long ago, when that event of The Lady and the Tiger was held in your capital. He was among your people in the audience. But he was a man of great sensitive disposition. And just before the choice was made, he found his nerves failing. He could not bear to witness what he thought he could be witness, whatever it might be. So immediately He stepped away, left the amphitheater, mounted on his camel, rode back to his own country. Well, when he told us, his friends in our country, what he had almost witnessed but hadn't had the nerve to do it, and did not know the outcome of the choice, we were most interested. We were very, very interested in knowing what had happened, whether it was for good or bad. But we waited for a while. We decided that after a period of time, it was very likely that somebody from your own country would visit our city and would explain to us what happened. But weeks and months went by and this had not happened. So we decided that we would come, 5 of us as a deputation, to honorably request in your King's Court if somebody could tell us the outcome of that dreadful, dreadful choice. And that is why we were here. Well, when the King's High Official heard this, he ushered the visitors into a sumptuous room and seated them comfortably and brought them sherbet and coffee and smoking materials and everything that they could have had for their comfort. And then he sat down and faced them and said, "Honourable sirs, before I answer your question that you have asked, I need to tell you another story. Now, it is very well known in our country and in many of the neighbours around that our noble king, which you have asked us about, is very fond of the presence of beautiful women in his court. It has become so famous, all the ladies of the court are taken from the local most beautiful families with the most beautiful of daughters. And this news has spread. And were it not also that the story was spread about the king's way of administering justice, we might have had a lot more people visit our court before now. So, not long since, we did have a visitor from another land nearby. It was a young prince of high fame and great reputation and high station. He came to our court and desired an audience with our king. Well, such a known prince of such esteemed family would certainly be granted that, and so he was. And when he was admitted to the presence of our king and asked what his purpose was in visiting, asked courteously, and if there was a boon he requested, he answered, "Yes, your majesty, I have heard of the beauty of the ladies of your court, so much so that I have come to humbly ask permission of your majesty to take one of those ladies for my wife." Well, when our king heard that, his face reddened. He began to breathe rather heavily. We were all afraid at the court that some angry words might spring to his lips. But he controlled himself with a great effort. And then he said to the young prince who was visiting, and quite abruptly, "Your request is granted. Tomorrow you shall be married to one of the most beautiful ladies of our court. I will see to it that everything is prepared." But your majesty," said the prince, I hoped perhaps to meet one of the ladies." "Say no more," roared the king. "This is my decision. You will be given everything you have. The wedding will take place tomorrow. It will be one of the most beautiful ladies. That is all I have to say to you." And he said to the attendants around, "Now take this prince to a comfortable apartment. See that he has all he needs. Send him clothes makers, armorers, everyone he needs to make the wedding. And be sure that the wedding is prepared for noon tomorrow." But again," said the prince, your majesty, "No, I have said enough on the subject," said the king. "Go and be prepared. Your wedding shall be tomorrow." And his attendants took the prince off to a lovely, sumptuous apartment where he was shown everything that he would be needed, where he was measured for clothes and armors and jewels, and everything would be as it will. And the prince still was a little discombobulated. He said, but that I would like to meet one of the ladies first, please, not only to see that she is beautiful, as I'm sure she will be, but also her intelligence, her interests. "Well, we can't do anything about that," said the attendants. "The king has spoken. We cannot do anything at all." "But surely," said the prince. And then at that point he noticed another attendant nearby he hadn't noticed before. This was a tall, robed, turbaned man who was carrying in his arm, laid like a child asleep, a very large, very sharp scimitar with a very bright edge. He carried it tenderly, and he sidled up to the prince and he bowed. The prince, a little alarmed at the weapon he was carrying, said, and who are you? Ah, Your Highness, said the other courteously, I am the discourager of hesitancy. When our king has given some command to a friend or a subject or a visitor, and the visitor has some problems with that command, I am encouraged to attend at the visitor's side to remind him that I'm here when he looks at me. And the prince looked at him and proceeded to be measured for a coat. Still, he was troubled. But everything was done as the king had commanded. The clothes were made, jewels were bought. The very next morning, he was told that he was to be prepared to be brought to the room where the marriage ceremony was to be performed. And still he said, but surely I could at least talk with the king some more, ask a little bit more. At once, the tall, turbaned gentleman with the scimitar appeared at his side and said courteously, Your Highness, I am here. The prince said no more, so he was led into a room where the king and his court were assembled, where a priest was summoned, and he started once again to remonstrate just a little. Your Majesty, if I could just say one more thing. No, said the king, all shall be done. And as he said that, an attendant came up with a beautiful long length of silk in which he wrapped around the prince's head until his mouth could not speak anymore. And then he wrapped it around the rest of his head so that he could not see. But then he made some small openings so that he could hear, and in his mouth that he could speak. And a silence fell on the room, and he heard the words of the priest beginning to recite the marriage ceremony. And he also had the sense of somebody near him with a sweet fragrance and a rustle of silk that he thought might be the bride he was to be given. He reached out his hand, and another hand was put in his, a hand so small, so fine, so gentle, and again with a sweet perfume emanating from it, that he was enchanted. And he heard the priest ask first the lady if she would take him for her husband, and the lady, in the sweetest voice he had ever heard, said, I will. And then he was asked if he would take the lady. And there being nothing for it at this point, and he was enchanted already by the sense and the signs of the lady around him, even though he could not see her, that he also answered, I will. Another moment passed, and an attendant came and removed the silk from his eyes and his head, and he looked around to see his bride, but there was no one there. The king came down to greet him and congratulate him on his choice and of a fairest bride. And the young prince said, but where is she? Oh, she is here, said the king. Just come this way. And he motioned toward a curtain at the end of the room. And he led the young prince in. And the prince was utterly astonished. He saw a line of maybe 30 or 40 ladies, all of them exquisitely dressed, all of them, well, one was more beautiful than the other. And the king came and said to him, now, all you need is to choose your bride. But remember, if you tried to take away one of the ladies who is not your bride, you will be executed immediately. And again he heard the murmur of the one called the discourager of hesitancy, who stepped up to his side and whispered again courteously, I am here. The prince tried to remonstrate one more time, but the king said, no, immediately now. Go up and down this line of ladies and be sure you pick your true bride. So he went up and down, and he could not tell who it could be. They were all beautiful. They all looked up and then they looked down. They all had soft voices and small, smooth hands. No more delay, said the king. If I had married such a bride today as you have, I would not hesitate to claim her for my wife. The prince carefully went up and down the line again, and this time there was just perhaps a small change in two of the ladies. As he passed them, one of them smiled a little, and the other frowned a little. Perhaps he tried again to the king. No more, said the king. I will give you 10 minutes to choose your bride, or she who has just been made your bride will now become your widow. The prince thought, if she smiled, then she must be pleased that I'm her husband. But the one who frowned, perhaps she did not like me. Perhaps she's also thinking, he does not recognize me. He has not claimed me. The smile, the frown. No more delay, shouted the king. And there was nothing for it. So the prince stepped forward and took the hand of one of the ladies. Loud rang the bells. Loud cheered the people, for he had taken his lawful bride. And to the deputation from the other country, the king's officials now said to them, "Now, you have heard that story. If you can tell me which lady the prince chose, the one who smiled or the one who frowned, then I will tell you which came out of the door, the lady or the tiger." At the latest relation of events, the 5 visitors had still not decided.
We have another question, which is, after those 2 stories, do you want me to bring Catherine back again? Knowing that these are the stories that she chose. Anyway. Really? So, our next teller is Jennifer Ferris, and we're going to dip our toes on the other side of reality at this point. Those who, don't know if it's quite magic, but we'll see.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you for that great story, those 2 great stories, Catherine. I'm going to have to think about that for quite a long time. Quite a long time. So this is another arrival story, not in Victoria, but at our new house on Prior Street in Victoria. And of course, Victoria is quite famous for its ghosts and spirits. I can think of at least 3 ghosts that live in my immediate neighborhood. Across the street in the brown wooden house, you can sit in the kitchen on a warm summer's afternoon and hear the footsteps of a small child running across the bedroom floor above our heads, and a woman's voice calling, "Roland, Roland." There is no little boy called Roland at that house, and the mother's voice is completely unfamiliar. Well, when we were thinking of buying the house just across the street, the house that we live in now, we had a tour with the real estate agent, and we realized right away that the house was being rented to a young family. The owner actually lived in Prince George. And we also understood that this little family did not want to move out. They didn't want us to buy the house. And so the mother, a woman in her early 30s, wandered around behind us as we took a tour of the house, pointing out all the house's defects and problems. And at the end of the tour, just as we were leaving, she pulled me aside and said, "Do you know this house is haunted?" Well, no, but it certainly made the house even more attractive. So we did buy the house. And a few weeks after we moved in, the woman who lived in the brown house just across the way with little Roland running around in her upstairs floor, she stopped me on the street and said, "Oh, we're so glad you've moved to the neighborhood. Did you know that your house is haunted?" "Well, yes, I do know that it's haunted, but I don't know the story. Can you explain?" "Oh, yes," she said. When that little family that had to move out when you bought the house, when they first arrived, there was a mother and father and 2 young children. And unfortunately, the adults were not getting along. There was a lot of screaming and yelling and slamming of doors. And then at night, as they lay in their beds, they heard something going on downstairs. Doors slamming, plates crashing, odd bumps that they could not explain. And when they ventured down in the morning, they found plates that had been placed on the counter in the kitchen, now in pieces on the floor. Pictures that had been hanging on the wall when they went up to bed were now on the floor, their glass smashed. Well, this went on for quite a while, and eventually the husband and wife split up. The husband moved out, but they soon decided that they should be amicable for the children's sake, so the whole relationship quietened down. And the nocturnal noises disappeared. Now, when we moved into the house, I was hoping for a bit of a bang and crash at night, maybe the odd smashed plate or the glass of a picture broken because the picture had been thrown on the floor. Nothing. And I'm slightly offended that the ghost found us so boring. Well, that phenomenon is called a poltergeist. It comes from the German word which means knocking spirit. Usually poltergeists, they're noisy but harmless. Only a few overstep the bounds of decency. The story I'd like to tell you it's a true story, and it comes from a collection of scary tales. The picture on the front of the book is of a very unattractive rat with snarling teeth. This story comes from probably 130 years ago, maybe a little longer, in Tennessee. In this little village, there was an old woman who lived in a tiny cottage in the woods. Now, she was not the kind of old woman that you take your problems to, that you go to for a love potion or some advice. No, she was mean. If anyone came near her little house in the forest, she would concoct a spell and they'd go away with a limp or a toothache. And so the people of the village stayed away from her. Well, she was an old woman. She was a really old woman. And one day she was out in a field that bordered on the forest, quite far from the farm that it belonged to. She was in the field gathering deadly nightshade. When she was overcome by a fit, she fell to the ground and died. No one witnessed her passing. Nobody came across her body. And people just assumed that she was still in her house, in the forest, making up nasty spells. Well, that body lay unseen for quite a long time. The clothes disintegrated, the flesh began to moulder and fall away from the bones, and then the bones were carried away by animals. No one knew that the old woman was dead. Well, it just so happened, about 2 years later, the children from the family that owned this field, the Bell family, the children were out playing. It was a beautiful spring morning, and they were out running and jumping and chasing and playing with a ball and playing tag. And they got further and further and further away from the farmhouse until they found themselves in that field on the edge of the forest. They were playing tag when the youngest child, Beth, tripped on something, fell and grazed her knee. She was crying. Her older brothers and sisters, you know how big those farm families were, older brothers and sisters came to comfort her and to give help. "What did you trip on?" they said. "I don't know, but it's something over there," said Beth. They looked and saw that she had tripped on a human jawbone. Ugh, what a horrible thing. One of the older boys picked it up and threw it away. But then her sister said, "No, that must belong to somebody. We should take it home and show it to Mother." So they went back to the farmhouse and they showed it to Amy Bell, the mother of the family. "Oh, that is disgusting," she said. "Put it in the shed at the back of the house, and we'll ask your father what we should do with it." And then they forgot all about it. And that evening, after the dinner was made and the family was sitting around the big kitchen table, there was a gust of wind, and the big water pitcher just fell on its side, scattering water all over the table. Amy jumped up, mopped up the water. "Sit down, everybody," she said. "I'm not going to let that disturb our dinner." And she was just raising the fork to her mouth when her water glass levitated and threw itself against the wall, shattering. And there was this noise. A horrible cackle. And things started happening, pictures leaping off the wall, plates crashing to the ground. Somebody apparently reached over and tugged at the braids of one of the little girls. And in that moment, they saw something, the swirl of a black cape, long, stringy grey hair, and dark, piercing eyes. "I'll be back." Well, from that day forth, it was never ending. At night, quilts would be whipped off beds, leaving the person lying there cold and shivering. Toys, favourite teddy bears, would disappear and be found in strange places. The milk soured in the dairy. Pictures were broken. The sitting room filled with water. The sewing room filled with soot. It was unbearable, and every so often that dreadful wind accompanied by Well, the family did not know what to do. Why were they the object of all this fury? They didn't understand. And it really bothered the father, John Bell, and he knew he had to protect his children, and so he decided that he would face whatever it was alone. So, one evening, he made a bed in front of the fire in the kitchen. He took off his shirt, he took off his work pants, and he put them on a chair, and still dressed in his singlet and his long johns, he made himself comfortable in that little bed that he made in front of the fire. And he was just dropping asleep when he heard. He opened his eyes and saw his shirt and pants rise up from the chair where he had left them. The shirt seemed to fill out. The sleeves opened as if an arm was being pushed in. His pants, there, standing up and being, Lord, it looked like somebody was pulling them up. Agile as a cat, John leapt out of his sleeping place and grabbed the thing around the waist, intending to drag it over and throw it into the flames of the fire. Oh, but it was not easy, for this thing that he was holding had become so heavy. And the smell like rotting eggs, or the stink of the grave. Oh, it was terrible. And in the end, he just could not hold on any longer. And the clothes fell to the floor, and the witch leapt up. "John Bell, if you want to get rid of me, you must bury my jawbone that you threw so carelessly in that shed behind your house. And you must find my tooth. One of my teeth fell from its socket as that nasty little boy threw my jawbone across the field. You find that tooth, and you bury it with my jawbone, or I will never give you a day or a night of peace." Well, following morning, John went out to the shed. It was hard to find that jawbone, so much. Gosh, tools discarded, boxes and parcels, a rocking horse, an old cradle, but at last he found a small box with a human jawbone, and sure enough, there was a socket empty of a tooth. "We have to find that tooth," he said to his family, and so they hiked across the farm to the meadow where the children had found the jawbone. And the whole family looked up and down, this way and that, back and forth, criss-cross. No tooth. Well, we'll just have to bury the jawbone, I guess, said John. Maybe that will satisfy the ghost. And so they went back to the farm, they got the jawbone, and they buried it. But as you can probably anticipate, the old witch ghost was not satisfied. Oh, how she tormented John, did not give him a moment's rest. He became sicker and sicker from her tormenting. She caused his tongue to swell to twice its size. She made his bones ache, his eyes burn. And at last, under all this pressure and unhappiness and pain, John died, and he was buried in the family plot. But do you think that the witch stopped? Oh, no. She just moved her attention on to one member of the family at a time, at a day. We have to find that tooth, said Amy Bell. Children, go out and look. And so they went out. They thought perhaps it had been taken away by an animal. It could be in any field on the farm. So they each took a field and they looked and looked. Days went by. They returned day after day looking for that tooth. One of the older girls eventually found herself in that field where they had found the jawbone some years before. She walked up and down, this way and that, criss-cross, back and forth, and all of a sudden, the sun came out from behind a cloud, and when she looked down, she saw something glinting in the grass. She went over. Yes, it was the tooth. She ran back home. They buried the tooth with the jawbone. And from that day forth, relative peace, although sometimes on a windy night someone might feel their quilt being ripped away from the covers. They might hear that laugh. She liked to play with them every so often, just as the dawn breaks through the night to the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a heck of a laugh you've got now. I'm impressed. So now it's my turn. This story is called The Tinker and the Ghost. In the great wide field by the city of Toledo, there was a great gray castle. For many years before the beginning of this story, the castle had been empty, and that was because it was haunted by a ghost. And this ghost would go from room to room to room in a thin, sad voice, saying things like, "Oh me, oh my." It sobbed and it wailed. But no one could do anything about it. They tried. It became quite famous. And so scholars and brave adventurers and learned men would come and try to stay in that castle overnight so that the ghost would disappear. But every single one of them was found dead the next morning in front of the wide fireplace in the great hall. The lord who owned the castle had put forward a reward, 1,000 lares, which I take to be gold coins, for anyone who could get rid of that ghost. No one had succeeded. Well, one day, and it happened to be the last day of October, a jolly tinker. Now, tinkers, they mend metal objects. We must have them somewhere today, but these people would travel about. And our tinker arrived in the village that was around the walls of the castle. Nobody lived in the castle. And So he was in the marketplace, and the good wives there had brought him the various pots and pans and such to repair. And as he was doing that, they were chatting with him. After all, he was a very pleasant stranger or such. So they told him that about this castle and about the haunting of the castle, and that he was there on a very special day. This was a day, All Hallows Eve, where lights, ghostly lights of different colors, would shoot up through the chimney from the great room there. And they said, if he dared to do it and got up to the castle close enough, he might even be able to hear that ghost as it made its way through the castle rooms. Well, he said, you don't know me. He said, I am not afraid of man or ghost. I'll happily go up to the castle and spend a night with that poor, dismal, lonely ghost. And they were astonished. You'd spend the night in the castle? But do you know that there's a reward? If you can get rid of that ghost, there's 1,000 gold pieces that's offered. Well, he said, that changes things somewhat. He said, I would be willing to rid this castle of its ghost, but I'm a man who needs to be fed well. So, in order to take this on, you will need to give me a load of firewood, a side of bacon, 12 fresh eggs, a flask of wine, and a frying pan. Well, they were only too happy to do this. They scattered about, gathered up all that he needed, and as the evening came on, he loaded up his donkey, and up he went on the road into the entrance of the great castle. And you may not be too surprised to know that nobody actually accompanied him any closer up to it. So he unloaded his donkey in the courtyard and left the donkey to eat the grass that had been growing up there. And he carried his provisions into the castle. It was pitch black and smelled kind of cold and musty. And as he was making his way, the bats, he could feel their wings on his cheeks as they went by. Well, they got into the room and immediately started a fire in a corner of that great fireplace. And he sat down and rubbed his hands and thought, that's what you need to face fear and cold. Then he got out his provisions and he immediately started carefully cutting the slices of bacon off. And then he put the frying pan on and started the bacon, and he found that its sizzle and pop was actually quite a cheery sound. And as he was sitting there about to reach for the flask of wine, he heard it. Oh me, oh my, it sobbed and it wailed. And he said, oh, that's not a very friendly greeting for a visitor. But, he said, for a man who's used to donkey braying, it's tolerable. Oh me, oh my. And so he finished getting the bacon cooked, and he took it off and put it on a piece of paper to drain, cracked an egg in, and he heard a different sound that came. Look out below, I'm falling. And he said, well, just don't fall into the frying pan. I'm falling. Shoo, thump. And what had landed in the fireplace was a leg. It seemed like a pretty good leg, and it had half a pair of brown corduroy pants on. Well, he carried on, and he was eating some of the bacon and the egg, and he hears again, look out below, I'm falling. Whoomp. Another leg, say the other half of the pair of pants, and so he picked it up and moved it away from the fire. And he carried on for a while. He's now putting another piece of bacon in and swirling it around so it doesn't get burned. And he hears again, much louder, look out below, I'm falling. Whoomp. This time it was a torso wearing a blue shirt and a brown jacket. Well, he cracked another egg into the pan, and he thought, wow, well, that's something. And there was another warning, and an arm fell. A further warning, and another one. And he finished off the eggs that he had cooked, and he was just about to put some more of the bacon in the pan when he hears, "Look out below, I'm falling." Wow, just don't mess up my egg. And he thought, well, this should be an exciting one because we're at the head now. And so, sure enough, this head comes rolling down out of the fireplace. Thump, 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 thump. And it lands. And he looks at it, and, it was a pretty good head. It had dark, thick hair, dark beard, and dark eyes as well, which were looking a little bit apprehensive. So he put aside his frying pan just in case. He didn't know what was going to happen next. But what happened next might have tipped over the frying pan. He was so astonished because the pieces began to drift towards each other and coalesce. And there standing in front of him looked to be a living man. But of course it couldn't be a living man, must have been a ghost. And he says to the ghost, "Well, sir, would you like some bacon or some egg?" "No," said the ghost, "I have no need of food, but first of all I want to say you are the first man who has survived long enough to have me gain my form again. All of the others," he said, "all of the others, they couldn't last until I was even half finished before they died. I had to keep trying over again." And the tinker said, "Well, thank you very much." And he turns and he starts to get ready to cook something else. And the ghost says, wait. Please help me just a little bit more. If you help me a little bit more, I can expiate my sins and gain entrance to the kingdom of heaven. Please help me. I have buried 3 bags of coins out there. One of copper coins, one of silver coins, and one of gold coins. I stole them from some thieves, and I came to this castle and buried them. But they tracked me down, and they killed me, and then they cut me into pieces. But they didn't find the money. Come out with me, and I can show you where it is. You can dig it up. And so the tinker went out with him into the courtyard. I can tell you the donkey was a little bit alarmed about this and kicked up a bit of a fuss, but the ghost led him over to where the cypress trees were and pointed there and said, "Dig." The tinker said, "Dig yourself. It's you that's getting your sins forgiven." So the ghost started to dig, and he did dig up 3 bags of these coins, copper, silver, and gold. And he said, "Now, what I want done with this is I want you to promise that you will give the copper coins to the church, the silver coins, distribute them among the poor, and the gold coins you can keep. Do you promise?" And then Tinker agreed, and he promised he would follow those wishes. "Well, then," he says, "now, help me get my garments off." And so the tinker helped him pull his clothes off, and as soon as they were off, whoosh, the ghost was gone up to heaven. And he knocked on heaven's door, and St. Peter answered it. And when he explained to St. Peter that he'd expiated his sins, St. Peter welcomed him in graciously to the kingdom of heaven. Down below, the tinker had taken the 3 bags into the great room again, and he cooked himself up another egg, and then he went to bed. The next morning, the townspeople were coming up there to collect his body. They were a little sorry about that because they rather liked the tinker, but they were astonished to see him just finishing up his breakfast. And they said, "You're alive?" "Of course I'm alive. And I can tell you that first thing I'm going to do is go collect my reward, because I can assure you that the ghost is gone forever from this castle." Well, they were still astonished. He said, "And the provisions, thank you very much. They were adequate, and they lasted me the whole time." So he packed up everything on his mule, and to their astonishment, again, 3 bags of obviously coins, and off he heads. He collects that 1,000 gold pieces reward. A very happy lord was glad to be able to get his castle back. And then he did as he'd promised. He went off to Toledo, and he gave the copper coins to the priest, and he gave the silver coins, he distributed amongst the poor, And then he took the gold coins and his gold coins for reward, and off he went and spent many years then in idleness and complete contentment with his reward. And that's how you deal with ghosts. Eggs and bacon. Wouldn't you have known? And I've asked Jennifer to give us one more story. She told this just recently, and I was really charmed by it, and so I hope you will be too. So come on in, Jennifer, and be our closing act.
Thank you, Lee. Wonderful story, so well told. Well, thank you very much to our audience for coming today, and thanks to those who are watching us through live streaming. Worcester, russet, Cox's orange pippin, St. Cecilia, a large, tough cooking apple, and Beauty of Bath. My great-uncle Alan was waxing lyrical about the apples that grew on his farm in Kent, in the south of England. I was astonished that my great-uncle Alan was talking to me like this, because usually he was either silent or sarcastic. Russet and Worcester are good growers, not like that Beauty of Bath over there, he said in his Kentish drawl. I looked to where he was looking. It was maybe 10 or 12 apple trees, short trunks, long slender branches reaching up into the sky, and within the leafy mantle, yellowish, pinkish apples, small, child size. Uncle Alan reached out and plucked one of the beauties from that tree and bit deep into the flesh. See, he said, see that pink on the skin? Well, it goes right through the flesh to the middle. Yes, he was right. On the sun side of the apple, it was bright pink. And just beneath the skin, vibrant rose that faded until it was no more than a slight blush next to the bright brown seeds at the core of the apple. Uncle Alan gave me one of the apples to eat. Oh, yes, the skin so tender, the flesh firm and bursting with juice that was the perfect mixture of sweet and tart. A good apple, I thought. But Uncle Alan, did you plant these trees? If you don't think Beauty of Bath is reliable, I was 8 years old, and since I was actually having a conversation with my Uncle Alan, I thought that I would make the most of it. Did you plant these apple trees, or were they here when you came? Oh, I planted them, said my Uncle Alan. Planted them for your Aunt Jen, because they're her favourite. Uncle Alan and Auntie Jen had arrived at Poplar's farm in 1930. My uncle would have been maybe 31 years old. He still had the clipped vowels of a privately educated schoolboy, which he soon lost, preferring to talk in the local dialect. World War I had taken 5 years from my uncle's life. 3 as a prisoner of war, made to work in a salt mine, underground most of the time, his only friends, the little pit ponies that pulled the wagons through the tunnels. When he eventually made it back to England in 1919, he was placed in a mental hospital for 2 years, along with other ruined men. When he was released, he made a vow that he would not work inside. No, he wasn't going to go into an office like his brothers. He would only work in the fresh air. So he enrolled in a farming course at Cirencester Agricultural College. And when he was finished, well, he was fond of saying, I had the luckiest day of my life. That was the day he met my Auntie Jen. Now, we used to call Auntie Jen a Kentish maid. Born in Kent, peaches and cream complexion, and a nature as sweet as any fruit grown on the farm. They never had their own land. No, they were what we used to call bailiffs, and they were in charge of 3 farms owned by the local landowner, Barry Williams. As my uncle and I bumped through the fields in his old World War II Jeep left behind by the Americans when they went back home in 1945, Uncle Alan named his children. Now, Uncle Alan and Auntie Jen never had actual children of their own, which caused my aunt great sadness, and I think that's why she was always so kind and loving to my sister and I when we visited the farm, and we visited a lot. But my Uncle Alan could not resist naming his children. Worcester, Russet, Cox's Orange Pippin, St. Cecilia, and Beauty of Bath. Now, no father should have favourites, but he would say, well, Russet and Worcester, they're good growers, strong, and they last well in the warehouse. Cox's Orange Pippin is a very good seller. Oh, but Beauty of Bath, well, you do have to eat it within a week of picking or it goes soft, but really within that week, there is no apple I would rather consume. It's 66 years since that conversation with my great-uncle Alan, probably 50 years since I have tasted a Beauty of Bath. But that little apple paved the way for a lifetime of loving apples and autumn. And that farm saved my Uncle Alan from being a ruined man. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Those of you who are here especially, of course, our most faithful fans. And it's now my pleasure on your behalf and ours to thank Longevity John and Ted Cadillac for this opportunity to tell our stories here. And on your behalf to thank the tellers. Jennifer and Catherine on the tellers' behalf and my own to thank you for coming here online or in person and joining us. There are, speaking of apples, 3 apples, it's said, that fall when a story is told. 1 for the teller, 1 for the listener, and 1 for the one who takes it to heart. I thank you for taking these stories and us into your hearts. And see you in November, I hope.
We'll make our own choices to what happened.
Well, that's what Catherine's telling me. It's about choices.
I think it's to the tiger. I think it was to the tiger. I think that it was a terrible rumble and there was an earthquake and then all of a sudden, you know, yes, the choice was made for that. Yeah, maybe that was it. There you go. A terrible rainstorm and then it was lightning. Yeah, an earthquake and they all went.
Stories we have that we tell ourselves, stories that bend with time. Histories change like books on a shelf, pages that mean